Hello and welcome. You're listening to Exposed Abortion in America, where we uncover the truth of the abortion industry. I'm your podcast host, Eva Cooley, and in today's episode, we are going to hear from David Daleiden. David is the undercover journalist who made the groundbreaking discovery that Planned Parenthood was illegally harvesting and selling baby body parts for profit. David and his team met with top-level abortion doctors and directors and discovered some of the most barbaric and sinister activity in our modern age. Today, you as our listener get to hear firsthand about the secrets that Planned Parenthood has worked so hard to bury.
So, David, it is such an honor to be speaking with you today. You are an investigative journalist, a writer, a staunch defender of life. You're a man in the arena and a hero to so many pro-lifers. You have put so much on the line to uncover some of the darkest secrets of the abortion movement in these past 10 years. And everyone at SBA, Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, is just so grateful that you would take the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with us and to talk about your experience with the abortion giant Planned Parenthood. Now let's get right into it, David. Can you tell us about your background and what first brought you into the pro-life movement?
Sure. So, just to kind of recap for any of your listeners who either are kind of newer to some of this set of issues, or maybe don't remember from everything that happened and started almost 10 years ago in 2015. So I'm the founder and president of the Center for Medical Progress. We're a nonprofit citizen journalism investigative reporting organization. And we're the organization that was responsible for the undercover video series 9 years ago that documented Planned Parenthood's top-level abortion leadership callously negotiating the harvesting and sale of aborted baby body parts. I have cared about this issue for a really long time, really ever since I was a teenager. When I was growing up in Northern California. I had an experience where people were arguing about abortion at school, and I didn't really have a whole lot of like facts or deep knowledge about the issue. I think I was probably 13 or 14, and so I went home and I started just researching and Googling it because something seemed off, but I just couldn't really put my finger on it. And I discovered two facts really quickly that really convicted me very strongly and really have never left me to this day. And the first thing that I discovered at that time, this was probably in 2003 or 2004, was that at that time there was well over 1 million abortions, almost 1.3 million abortions every year in our country. So it's not just some once in a blue moon kind of extremely unusual medical circumstance in which babies are killed by abortion, but this is something that happens routinely and happens really on a unbelievably massive scale. And then the second fact that I discovered at that time was I saw a photograph of what it looks like when a baby is killed by an abortion, and that makes all of the rhetoric really real and really visceral, and really impossible to ignore. That it's not just a talking point, that they're killing babies, that abortion kills actual recognizable babies who are individuals just like you or I. And this happens well over 1 million times. This has been happening, close to or over 1 million times a year in our country every year for as long as I've been alive. And that puts it on just sort of the big scale of historic injustices where people look back on that 50, 100 years in the future, and you want to say, wow, if I had been around at that time, if I had been alive, I would have been one of the people who was different, right? I would have been one of the people who stood up and said, no, this is wrong. You can't treat people that way. And so I felt very strongly convicted by all of that. I started getting involved with sort of local pro-life groups. The first pro-life organization I was ever involved with was the UC Davis Students for Life as a high school student, growing up in Davis, California. And UC Davis Students for Life was really interesting because, they were connected to kind of other pro-life groups at different University of California campuses. And I remember the first sort of event that I went to with them was a conference at UC Berkeley where they had a group of Hindu pro-life vegans who were there, and they had a group of they had Feminists for Life of America, they had Democrats for Life there. So I had a very interesting sort of early exposure to a very diverse and kind of non-orthodox uh, uh, um, uh, set of pro-life advocacy, and which I think is sort of different from a lot of people, or a lot of people don't necessarily expect that. They think that you must be somebody from a homeschool background or something like that, which I'm not. I grew up in the public school system in Northern California. But I'm Catholic, obviously, but the sort of the mix of influences that sort of really first clued me into and sort of pointed the direction for me in terms of pro-life advocacy, was kind of unique, to the time and place that I come from. And I've only gotten more and more thankful for that over the years, because at the end of the day, this is a really big issue that involves really core human values and really universal human values, and certainly for any enlightened democracy that would exist in the world. And so I'm really thankful to have always had that kind of perspective on what it means to be pro-life. But so anyway, so I ended up, it's not a secret. I met Lila Rose from Live Action when we were both in high school. And that kind of got me involved with the early form of Live Action, and I was director of research with their organization for several years, from 2008 to 2013. So I got a lot of exposure to kind of the world of undercover journalism and things like that. Worked on a lot of those early undercover projects. And in 2013, by 2013, I had become really convicted about the particular topic of selling aborted baby body parts. I just think that this is a phenomenon that is so particularly barbaric and unjust and tragic, and I really felt that it deserved to have a really specific kind of focus, and that story really deserves to be told, and that story really highlights a lot of the most important things that we need to be talking about, and a lot of the most important values that we need to be talking about when it comes to abortion policy and practice in our communities. And so I started the Center for Medical Progress in 2013, to monitor and report on medical ethics and advances that impact human dignity, with a particular focus on fetal experimentation and the trafficking of aborted babies. And so we're most well known for our groundbreaking undercover investigation of Planned Parenthood's participation in the harvesting and sale of aborted baby body parts. So the videos, I trained a team of six total undercover investigators, including myself, to go undercover at the highest levels of the abortion industry for almost 3 years. We had meetings with their top level abortion doctors, top level research officials, and I've probably spoken to face personally, um, at least 2 dozen, maybe even up to, in terms of having high quality, detailed conversations. I've probably had those with maybe 20 to 30, maybe even almost up to 50, either abortion doctors or heavily involved abortion workers, about late-term abortions and harvesting and selling baby body parts. So
Wow.
I think that is, kind of a unique part of my career. I have spent probably more quality time with more people who are more directly responsible for killing babies and abortions in our country
Wow. Yeah.
than almost anybody else involved in pro-life advocacy. The only exceptions would be like actual, people who used to work in in the industry. Uh,
Right.
so anyway, I know I'm trying to answer a simple question about my background here, but so anyway, so to to sort of land the plane, as they say, and bring us to now. So we released the undercover videos in the summer of 2015. I mean, they went viral. They totally changed the conversation on abortion in our country at that time, on a nationwide level. I am personally very grateful that we were able to put a strong focus on the humanity of our brothers and sisters in the womb who are threatened by the abortion industry with
Yeah.
those videos, with seeing actual taxpayer funded Planned Parenthood abortion leaders talking about the little baby hearts and lungs and livers and brains that they would be so careful not to crush with their forceps so they could sell them for money
Mhm.
afterwards.
So horrible.
That put a spotlight though on the humanity of all of us when we are when we are in our prenatal part of life, and it put a spotlight on just the absolute brutality of industrial scale abortion, as it existed in our country at that point. And I think that focus on the humanity and the injustice of the abortion industry, I think that was a big part in activating um, activating different states and public officials to to press for stronger, more protective laws, and I think led us very very securely to the Dobbs case and to the overturn of Roe v. Wade, not even 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's a totally different landscape now. I'm really happy that my organization and my team's work was able to contribute a little piece to changing history like that. And now now we're almost 10 years later, and we're talking about, people are seriously talking about Planned Parenthood defunding, and there are entire states and swaths of our country where children and families are protected from the predatory abortion industry. And so there's so much to be thankful for, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be a little part of it. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
my background.
thank you so much for giving us all that background about yourself and about your organization. And I think you're exactly right. Like your discoveries, your bravery has inspired thousands, if not millions, of fellow pro-lifers from the policy end of things and also just on a more local level. Like I was talking with my dad last night, actually, in preparation for getting to speak with you because he's a huge fan of yours. And he was saying that when he watched your videos, when he saw your bravery, it ignited within him his own little fire, and it led him to want to, go and pray outside of abortion centers and things like that. And it's really amazing how the bravery of one man can just set a spark for an entire nation. And I think that that's really what your action has done. And so I just want to say on a personal level, like, thank you for doing that. Thank you for igniting that fire within people, because when they see the inhumane ways that these little babies are being spoken about, that creates anger in an entire nation, and that is what you've done. So thank you so much, David, for that. Was there an initial lead that caused you to suspect that Planned Parenthood could be participating in this illegal activity?
Yeah, so the trafficking and sale of aborted baby body parts and the harvesting of aborted babies for frankly, government-sponsored experimentation at taxpayer-funded laboratories across the country. This is something that didn't just start recently. This is something that's been going on for quite a long time. It's been going on in a really systematic and organized way, certainly since abortion was mass legalized in the 1970s. But it even, there's particular locations that have been involved in this for stretching back even longer than that. But there was a really important early investigative journalism work done by a journalist named Suzanne Rini from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who I think it was the late 1980s was the first edition of her report, maybe the early 1990s, and then it was updated later in the 90s. She wrote this really foundational early book called Beyond Abortion: A Chronicle of Fetal Experimentation. And that was sort of the first really big expose of the harvesting and trafficking of aborted babies for experimental purposes by big pharma and by government laboratories and by different academic universities and university laboratories, and the participation of different abortion clinics and abortion chains within that. And then several years after Suzanne Rini's book came out, Mark Crutcher and his organization Life Dynamics did a really groundbreaking undercover. It actually, I guess you wouldn't call that undercover. They did a really groundbreaking investigative journalism report of their own about the sale of baby body parts at big abortion centers across the country. And they had whistleblowers coming forward, and there was an ABC 2020 report that was done based on that. There were early attempts at congressional investigations based on that, and unfortunately, there was a lot of focus on it. There was a lot of attention in 2000, 2001 when that started coming out. A lot of that led to the final passage of the federal partial birth abortion law. But then after that, everything kind of went quiet, and people didn't really focus on it that much. So when I first learned about the phenomenon of selling aborted baby body parts in our country, this was in about 2009 or 2010. It had been 8 or 9 years at that point since it had really been talked about in a really big public way in national media, and the only real sources that were out there that you could look through were the Life Dynamics investigation, Suzanne Rini's book, and then every so often you would find, still at that time 10 years later, you would find scientific journal studies, published reports where they would say we were experimenting with aborted fetal livers or aborted fetal brains from 20 to 24 weeks gestation, and we got them from Advanced Bioscience Resources in Northern California, or we got them from STEM Express, or we got them from Planned Parenthood San Diego, or we got them from Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast in Texas. And that was it. That was all that was out there. But in reviewing all that, in the Life Dynamics investigation, there was a big Planned Parenthood abortion center in Kansas was the source of a lot of their information. The many of the published studies that were being published around that time in the 2009, 2010, 2011 were making references to getting fetal body parts from Planned Parenthood. So it wasn't a total secret. If you looked carefully, it was clear that Planned Parenthood was involved in the supply of aborted babies and their body parts for government-sponsored experiments. What really clued me in that there was something really illegal going on, though, were two things. Number one, there was not just one, but there was several different like wholesaler companies that were actually starting up around that time, with the sole business model that they would harvest body parts from inside the Planned Parenthood clinics and then turn around and resell them to just different laboratory customers across the country. One of those companies was called STEM Express, and STEM Express explicitly advertised on their website that they would return a percentage of the fees that they would charge their research customers, or their laboratory customers as they call them. They say we return a portion of our researcher fees to the abortion clinics that work with us. And I was like, wow, that's, that sounds not correct. It's basically a profit sharing mechanism for the abortion clinics that provide them with body parts. And so however many that this wholesaler can sell, they then, there's 10 or 25% or whatever the portion is that they then return to the abortion clinic. The federal law on selling aborted baby body parts is actually pretty clear. There's been a lot of games played with it, as there are with any law that is important and that governs conduct that powerful bad actors are heavily invested in. But the federal law is very clear that that you're not allowed to engage in any kind of quid pro quo for the transfer of any human fetal tissue whatsoever. And the only exceptions are for actual reimbursements of actual costs of making a tissue donation. And when you just have a scheme where you are just direct revenue sharing from your sale of aborted baby body parts, that's not a cost reimbursement. That's a quid pro quo, that you give us body parts, you let us harvest body parts to sell inside of your clinic, and we'll give you 15% of what we make on it. That's called a quid pro quo. That's a sale, and that's a crime. So that's the first thing that really kind of tipped me off, that they're not just still like donating fetuses, they're selling aborted baby body parts, and this has been going on for too long with nobody saying anything about it. That was the first thing. And then the second thing is that some of these research studies that were being published talked about getting intact hearts harvested from the late term aborted babies, and then connecting them to either doing different experiments on them or connecting them to actual like laboratory machines that would keep them beating. So that means that the hearts were still beating while they were being harvested. So those two things really, being like kind of out there in plain sight if you knew where to look, really, I kind of, that's more than just a clue, it's more than just like cluing you in that something bad is happening or something wrong is being done. Those are pretty big red flags, as they say. But those are two early, early facts that helped convince me, that it was be really important to do this undercover study.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Hearing you talk just reminds me of that verse, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And I think that that's what you experienced in real time, of just seeing the depth to which people will go for the love of money. So that brings me to my next question. Can you walk us through some of the risks that you faced in order to begin this operation of exposing Planned Parenthood?
Well, I mean, this is gonna sound a little cliche, but I think the biggest risk is not trying, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like those of us who are involved in pro-life advocacy, like we're doing it because we're concerned about babies who are being killed in really brutal and barbaric ways by a taxpayer-funded nationwide industry. And so at the end of the day, like we're not the real victims involved in all of this. We are not we're the ones who made it out alive, right? Like we're not the ones who have forceps being put on our bodies to rip us apart and then sell our body parts afterwards. And many of us even are not are not actually the families, the fathers or the mothers who are having to like live with, with being the parent of a dead child for the rest of their lives because they were either abandoned or lied to by a taxpayer-funded, profit-driven business that is going to make money off of them and their children by hurting them and killing them. That's, we're actually relatively fortunate and relatively lucky, if we're in a position to be able to speak out against the practice of abortion and advocate for justice for the victims. So I think, I've always kind of felt like in a situation like that, the biggest risk is saying nothing, being silent, and not trying. But 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 I but the the issue of the topic of selling aborted baby body parts had been so quiet for almost a decade at the time that I was just starting to construct CMP's undercover investigation. That I was a little uncertain at the very beginning when I was first training the other undercover investigators, and we were first just starting to do our undercover networking with different Planned Parenthood officials. We basically it was really like a kind of like a secret shopper style investigation is what we did. Is like a secret shopper is somebody who like goes, sort of goes undercover, like to a shopping mall, to like the Louis Vuitton store or to the Hugo Boss store or something, and they're not really trying to buy anything, but they're there to kind of investigate like the customer service and the quality of the merchandise and stuff like that, and then either report back for their magazine or for their consumer protection organization or whatever it is. And so we were basically doing like my team, our whole undercover investigation was basically set up like being secret shoppers for aborted baby body parts. So we were posing as representatives of a middleman wholesaler biotech company, just like many of the existing ones that were cropping up at that time. Going in with the business model, with the proposed business model of saying we would like to come into your abortion clinics and harvest the organs from the aborted fetuses after you've done your abortions, and then resell them to our research customers, and then we will give you a portion of the money that we make from doing that, and won't that be great? And at the very beginning of the investigation, I was so concerned that like the issue had been so quiet for like 10 years at that point. I was so concerned that if we kind of said too much about it up front, or if we didn't use exactly the right language to really gingerly and kind of like sort of like vaguely hint at it with these abortion doctors, that everybody would freak out and everybody would clam up and nobody would talk to us. And so I was very careful, like, at the very beginning. I said to the team, I said, we're not even going to tell them, like, we're not even going to say fetal tissue, or fetal organs. Like, we're going to ask about like their specimens, like after their procedures, and just be like all of this very like Latinate, like euphemistic kind of language. And I was so shocked and so surprised from the very first undercover conversations that we did. Literally all we had to do was say to these Planned Parenthood abortion doctors and their leadership, hey, like, we love what you do, like, we think you're such heroes, we think you're doing such great things, like, with all the abortions that you do, and we would really like to come in and pay you to allow us to harvest fetal organs. And they were so happy to welcome one more player to the table. There was no, there was no shame, there was no embarrassment. Like, we're over here talking about, specimens from your procedures, and they're like, oh yeah, like, you want the fetal tissue, you want brains, you want eyes, you want livers, we'll do this on ultrasound. They were way more disturbingly comfortable with the activities of harvesting and selling aborted baby hearts and lungs and livers and brains than I thought they were going to be at the very beginning. And that was I mean, it was a little ironic because I was so kind of concerned about it at the very beginning, about the way that these conversations would whether these conversations were even possible. But it was also, I mean, it was sad and it was disturbing. but especially sad to see people who otherwise, doctors, right, who've gone to medical school, who are, who are supposed to be involved in caring for patients and caring for other people and doing no harm. But to be so eager to welcome one more player to the table to harvest and sell body parts from little babies who are just as recognizably human as you or I.
Yeah, I think that that is the most distressing aspect is that eagerness that I recognized. I went back and watched some of your videos, and I was particularly struck by that first video that you posted on your website, the Center for Medical Progress website, where there's just an unfeeling tone of the doctors when they're discussing like babies, children. And I don't know if you could speak more to that, but how was it when you were having to act in this way? Was there any element of you having to like take a gulp or take a minute to reflect on what you had just heard from the person that you were speaking to about baby body parts?
Yeah, there were a lot of moments like that. And and one of the I mean one of the tasks that you have to be prepared for in doing undercover work is that you're not necessarily going to have the opportunity to reflect on all of the potentially really horrible things that you hear in the moment while it's happening. You do have to kind of compartmentalize that and like store it for later. That's the whole reason that's the whole reason you've got a video camera, right? Is because you're recording what's being said, and you're engaging in the conversation, and you are investigating particular topics, and so you don't actually have the time or the opportunity in that moment to reflect on what's being said. You have to be prepared to hear some really awful things and know that it's being stored away and it's going to be analyzed later. But in the moment you still have to do the work. um, but I remember in particular when we had our undercover business lunch with Dr. Deborah Nucatola, who was at the time the senior director of medical services for Planned Parenthood nationwide. So that's literally the top abortion doctor at the entire organization, who is responsible for training the other abortion doctors, who's responsible for writing the medical ethics and medical standards and guidelines manual for Planned Parenthood nationwide, which is basically their how-to book for how to run your Planned Parenthood franchised abortion clinic. And who was also in charge of all the research abortions in Los Angeles at that time as well, in Southern California. And so we had a almost 3 hour long undercover business lunch meeting with her just to kind of get the whole lay of the land from Planned Parenthood's perspective on harvesting and selling aborted baby body parts from their late term abortions. And one of the particular questions that I had for her is I asked, if there's a particular body part that we need, are your doctors able to change the way that they're doing the abortion in order to make sure that we can get that and we can make that sale? And what she said was shocking on multiple levels. I mean, I'll never forget not just the fact that she said yes they could, number one, which is a huge violation of federal law and the research regulations for experiment for any kind of experimentation or how you treat human subjects participants, number one. But number two, what she said they could do, she didn't just say, oh, we'll do it in a slightly different way, a little bit more dilation or a little bit more time or something like that. No, what she said is that, oh yeah, she said what Planned Parenthood abortion doctors are actually really good at doing, what we do at my clinic in Los Angeles in Southern California, we will do these abortions with ultrasound guidance, so we know where we're putting the forceps on the baby, so we know not to crush the specific body parts that you're looking for. And using the ultrasound guidance with our forceps, we will flip the baby to a feet first position and then slowly pull and guide the baby out in that breech feet first position, so that there's increasing dilation of the pregnant woman as the abortion is going on, so that at the end of it, you can even get the head, the calvarium, as they call it, of the baby out intact to harvest an intact brain. So what she described at this undercover business lunch we were having at a fancy Southern California, Los Angeles restaurant, we're sitting there at this table booth in the middle of this crowded fancy LA restaurant with wine and pasta and salad and fish. and she's casually describing, oh yeah, we'll use ultrasound guidance to flip the baby feet first, guide it out, and then at the end of it you'll be able to get an intact head to sell the brain afterwards. And when I heard that, I mean, I knew the camera was still recording. I think I was sort of like mid forkful of the pasta that I was about to eat or something, and I sort of froze, and I just kind of stopped. I was viscerally disturbed and a little it's probably a little bit of a mix of fear and disgust, right? To hear about something like that being done to another little person who hasn't done anything wrong and hasn't done anything to deserve that. Just hearing about that being done to an animal, let alone to a human being, is something that's really hard to listen to, and it's really hard to take another bite of your lunch after hearing something like that. And then number three, hearing that description coming from a person who otherwise was really charismatic, and seemed fairly sensitive and concerned about being a good doctor, is such a contradiction, and such a it's just such a it's such a horrible thing to hear coming from someone who otherwise would be a really good doctor. And so that is, that's also kind of sad and kind of scary, to hear from anyone, but especially to hear from someone who otherwise is, would be kind of part of the elites of society that people would look up to in any peaceful and just civilization. But that's not the first time that we, that was not the first or the last time that we heard something like that while undercover. So there were definitely quite a few moments like that, and that is that's something that made it, certainly made it difficult. But I also think that it's moments like that, and it's experiences like that, it's conversations like that made our undercover reporting so powerful, because it highlights the humanity, the values, and the frankly the violations of humanity that are so embedded in the practice of abortion. We have a human baby being killed and harvested for human body parts by human doctors who are supposed to be taking care of human beings. And these are all of the values, the rules being broken, and the frankly traumatic feelings that are involved in all of that. I think that those conversations and those moments surface all of that and make it really clear, and capture that on camera for all of history to see forevermore.
Yeah, wow, that is really powerful, David. I just have to ask, where do you think that contradiction comes from? Like, how can a doctor appear to care so much about their work and following the correct principles of the Hippocratic Oath and everything like that, yet talk so matter-of-factly and so eagerly about these procedures that result in the sale of baby body parts?
I wish that more of them would speak for themselves about it. A lot of the abortion leadership of Planned Parenthood, they're totally public figures, and they're happy to come out in public, and talk about how badly they need like public support and taxpayer funding and all these different things. And among themselves, they talk about how proud they are of their abortion work and everything. So I really, these are all fairly intelligent, articulate people, I wish that they would just own it and they would come out publicly and talk about the contradiction and why, why they think this is justified and how they're able to justify it and how they're able to cope with it. Um, but uh, but they haven't really done that for the most part,
Mhm.
which I think tells you something about the relative levels of confidence in the truth of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think that there are some people who are, who have, there are actually many people now who have come out of the abortion industry. I'm thinking especially of people like Abby Johnson and other voices like hers who could probably actually speak um, more eloquently than I could about it. But I can just speak from sort of my observations and what I've what I've observed in the interactions that I've had with a lot of these people, and I just think that I don't think it's cliche. I think it is a truism that that hurt people, and I don't think there's I mean it's interesting. There's a I'd say there's kind of a there's an interesting breakdown among the abortion doctors that I met, the proportion of them, I'd say there's maybe like 30% of them that I felt like, they sort of reminded me of they sort of reminded me of like just like the sort of person who would run a really shady business and is just trying to, is trying to make money off of a kind of shady market that they've cornered, kind of like a drug dealer or maybe somebody who runs like a pornography store or something like that. And that was typically the men from kind of an older generation, and that's maybe 30% of them. The vast majority of them, though, almost 60-70% of them, especially the younger Planned Parenthood trained ones, tended to be women who typically have a very strong ideology and even kind of almost a kind of psychology sort of built around the built around abortion as a value. And but so I don't I mean I can't say that I know everything that goes into turning a bright-eyed um quick thinking medical student, into an industrial scale abortion doctor. I don't know everything that's happened to them that brings them to that position and that convinces them that they should keep on doing that full time. I do know that a lot of them are very traumatized by it. That they have nightmares, they have drinking problems, they have flashbacks, they I mean they plan, and this is in no way a secret. At the end of the day, even the most devoted disciples of abortion practice are having a horrible time doing it. And so, is their faith in abortion greater than our faith in the value of humanity and the justice in protecting people and not killing them when they're weak and vulnerable? No, their faith is not greater than ours in that. Their faith in that is actually very weak. And so that should give people, frankly, a lot of courage, and a lot of boldness in standing up and speaking the truth, for the importance of protecting our brothers and sisters in the womb and protecting every family or even just every mother-child relationship from the ravages of the abortion industry.
Wow, that is really eye-opening. And I think it's really interesting because Planned Parenthood, even right on their website, they use words like compassion. They have this image of wanting themselves to seem like they are the hope for women, that women should be looking towards, that women can find the best quality care at a Planned Parenthood area. However, obviously, that is not the case. And so my question for you is, what would your reaction be to those who still believe that Planned Parenthood is a safe place where vulnerable women can truly be taken care of?
I think that the public really needs to hear the message that 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 regardless of the issue that you are dealing with, if it's a challenging or unexpected pregnancy, whatever the level of fear or concern or whatever, whatever is going on in your experience of that, um, uh, everyone who is going through something like that deserves to be treated by a medical professional who will look at them holistically, who will not just look at them as a number for their quotas for the day, as some, or even worse, look at them as a harvesting pod for product that they can sell down the line afterwards, and even patent and make royalties off of, like they do at some places. Um, I think that I think that I think that I think that that Planned Parenthood has weaponized their position, trying to establish, trying to frame themselves as a mainstream compassionate provider of mainstream medical care, when in reality, their late-term abortions for body parts business is one of the most extreme things that the vast majority of people would be horrified about. One of the, I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but there's a lot of, there's a lot of pieces to unpack there. But one of the things that just, that reminds me of is just recently, CMP just recently published a video report from our ongoing FOIA investigations that are kind of expanding right now. We have a lot of different FOIA requests, public records requests out at different taxpayer-funded research centers around the country, and we just published a report a couple of months ago, right before the end of the year, about Planned Parenthood's fetal harvesting program in Southern California, at UC San Diego. And there's many things wrong about that. There's a, they have the whole thing is based on a contract where Planned Parenthood agrees to sell, this is a direct quote from the contract, proprietary aborted fetuses from Planned Parenthood to the taxpayer-funded laboratories at the University of California. And in exchange, Planned Parenthood will receive ownership of any intellectual property or patents that the university laboratories develop using the so-called proprietary aborted babies and experimenting on the so-called proprietary baby body parts that are supplied by Planned Parenthood. And so now that's bad enough. Okay, so Planned Parenthood is saying in this contract with the University of California that they have proprietary ownership over other people's babies that they're ripping out and killing, but those are Planned Parenthood's proprietary aborted babies that they have a right to own and sell. That's bad enough, and it's a clear violation of federal law. But then on top of that, the documents showed that when it comes to the consent forms that this big Planned Parenthood mega center in Southern California is using for their abortion patients to induct them into this harvesting program, the English forms for English-speaking pregnant women do disclose that there may be commercialization of the fetal body parts afterwards if the patient consents to participate in this research program. But the Spanish language consent forms that are stamped by the Ethics Review Board at UC San Diego and were drafted in participation with the Planned Parenthood Clinic and the National Planned Parenthood Research Office, the Spanish language consent forms that are being used for Spanish-speaking women only, and this is Southern California, this is San Diego, right on the border. So you're gonna have a significant population of people coming in who are using the Spanish forms only. The Spanish-speaking forms take that disclosure out and remove it entirely. So if you're an educated white English-speaking woman coming to Planned Parenthood and they ask you to participate in a research study to harvest your baby's body parts, they will inform you, oh yeah, there might be commercialization of them afterwards. But if you are, if you're an undocumented immigrant, if you are a Spanish-speaking person, if you don't speak English, they will not give you the same level of disclosure and the same facts about why they want to be able to rip your baby out, and what they're going to do with your baby afterwards. So that's and it's not just like one time that they did that. That form was used for 3 or 4 years in a row, and might still be the form that they're using literally to this day. The documents that we have go up to go as recently as 2020. We're going to be asking for more recent versions. But so that, I mean, so that like so that's like that's the reality, right? That's the reality of this business. Like an abortion business is not built around saying, oh, you're pregnant and having difficulties with it. Here, can we sit down and talk about it and find out what would be best for you and your baby? That's not what they're built around. They're built around looking at pregnant women and couples who are in a who are experiencing any kind of sudden difficulty in the fact that they're expecting a baby. They are built around commodifying that and taking advantage of people in some of their most vulnerable and emotional and fearful moments, to make money off of forcing them into a life or death decision that they can never take back. Um, and so I know that's you asked a kind of simple question, and there's a lot going on there, but I mean, but basically like that's the reality of the abortion industry. And so and most people, go figure, most people don't want to get their medical care from an organization like that if they know the facts. So, if and if you need, if somebody needs, birth control or STD testing or like whatever the case may be, you can go get it from somewhere else. You can go get it from a federally qualified health center. You can go get it from, from many other places where it's actually going to be cheaper, and it's not going to be performed by doctors and a so-called medical staff that are lying to people in their most vulnerable moments about life-changing decisions so they can make money off of dead baby parts afterwards.
Wow, that is a really powerful answer. Thank you so much for that, David. Now, I'm wondering what was Planned Parenthood's response to you and your team? And you can answer this either broadly speaking, if you would like, or get into specifics. Um, you can answer as well in reaction to your University of San Diego investigation or your human capital series. But what was the overwhelming response from Planned Parenthood to your investigations?
So Planned Parenthood was furious when this information started coming out, right? And they've because they know that if the public knows the truth about how they treat unborn children, how they treat their parents, their mothers, their families, and what they do with the aborted babies afterwards, they know that they can't survive that public scrutiny. That the public would decisively turn against their organization. They'll lose their federal funding. They'll be shut down, and industrial scale abortion will very quickly become a thing of the past. Planned Parenthood, as an operation, cannot withstand the scrutiny that would come from a full exploration of their participation in the harvesting and sale of aborted babies. So Planned Parenthood was furious when this information first came out 10 years ago. They reacted viciously with retaliatory lawfare against myself and my team. That's almost like a whole entire another podcast that we could talk about. But they, but they're furious, and they lashed out and reacted very, very viciously on the release of more undercover footage. They harnessed the police power of, at the time, the Attorney General of California, Kamala Harris, to bring a completely unprecedented selective prosecution under California's video recording law that has never been used against an undercover journalist before in its 70-year history and has never been used since. Mine was the first and only case, in order to try to seize the remaining videos to cover up the existing ones and try and bury it and pretend like all of this had never happened. And but it's very interesting, as time has gone on, there's been major leadership changes at Planned Parenthood. Some of the officials who were responsible for that original lawfare and weaponization, they're no longer with the organization. They have moved on. I'm still here with Center for Medical Progress. We're still reporting on the latest news about Planned Parenthood's participation in the harvesting and sale of late-term aborted baby body parts. And Planned Parenthood, almost 10 years later, has now gone pretty dark and pretty silent about reacting to any of this stuff because they know that they are under very heavy scrutiny for it. They know that the facts are not on their side. And I think they know that their time at just being a carnival of horrors for killing and selling late-term recognizably human babies on an industrial scale across the country, doing it with $700 million in taxpayer funding every year. I think they know that their time for that is short and that time is coming to an end. So this is information that they didn't want out there. They don't want it out there, but it's out there now and it's going to continue to come out. And they are they are going to be facing all the scrutiny that they deserve for it.
Yeah, that is awesome. And David, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm just going to ask you just a few more brief questions. But I was wondering if you could just broadly speak to us about the victories that you and your team have seen in the courts recently, in particular this week.
Yeah, so this week is really exciting because after 9 years of, like I said, really unprecedented lawfare, the state of California finally entered into an agreement where they will be completely dismissing the video recording case that was launched by Kamala Harris 9 years ago at the behest of Planned Parenthood. Um, this is an agreement that it's dropped all of the remaining charges in that case, save for one. They asked for a simple no contest plea with no which is basically saying like we agree not to have a contest with you anymore. Nullo contendere in Latin means I don't want to fight. I don't want to contest. And so in exchange for that, there's no punishment of any kind, no jail time, no. It's something that is typically referred to as diversion. In other cases, it's what they said that's what they said in the courtroom on Monday. And so in exchange for that, the final charge will ultimately be dismissed by operation of law within 6 to 12 months. So it's a little bit of a fig leaf for their office, I think. I don't think it's much of a fig leaf. But it's really incredible. For 9 years, that office pursued this case at the behest of Planned Parenthood, because Planned Parenthood was so desperate to cover up the facts of what's shown on the undercover footage, and ultimately 9 years later, they're walking away with nothing. The videos are out there, the public knows, and President Trump just issued an executive order last week saying that there has to be saying that there can no longer be federal taxpayer money going to organizations that fund or promote elective abortion, and Planned Parenthood is the biggest and primary example of that. So it's been a it's it this is we're only halfway through, and this is a pretty victorious week already. So it's really great to have that behind us, and it's really great to be able to focus fully on our investigative reporting mission and to continue to report the truth about how the abortion industry is hurting families and killing babies, and about the injustices of government sponsored experiments on aborted children. And I think that the truth is already starting to win out, and I think we're gonna have more really good victories in the future.
That's awesome. And we are just so delighted for you. And we are going to be keeping you in our thoughts and in our prayers in these upcoming months, David. And just as a closing question, could you tell our listeners what your mission is going forward, what your battle cry is now that these charges have been lifted against you?
Well, I mean, I don't know about a battle cry, but I think the message is that every single human being matters, right? I mean, I don't think that message has changed, and I think that the guiding message for all of my work, and I think the core value and the core message of my undercover reporting and CMP's continuing investigative reporting, is that human dignity is inviolable. Every human being matters, um, and uh, and and that's a value that needs to the foundations of that is when is when we are at our smallest and our most innocent, right? Because there's a lot of complaints that you can make about about an adult person walking around in the world, and there's lots of people that we upset, or we are sometimes rude, or people have disagreements, and there's always something that you can criticize or be upset at at an adult person for. But when we are at our smallest and at our youngest, just beginning to enter the human family, just entering the world, as a tiny baby, as a tiny infant, there's nothing that anyone at that age has done that's wrong. There's just a little spark of divinity that's just suddenly come into the world. And if we can't value and respect and protect our own humanity, at its purest and most innocent, and most vulnerable, how on earth are we going to do it, like, later on, like when things get messier and things get more complicated and more difficult, when we're all out here walking around in the world making each other upset? Like, I don't see a way to do that. I don't think you can have a functional civilization that doesn't protect its most innocent and most promising. So I think that's the message, that everybody's life matters. Everybody's life matters. Um, and uh, and um, and I think that is the core universal value that animates the pro-life movement, that animates our cause, that animates my work, and that is going to bring our civilization to a level greater than ever before. So that's my guiding principle.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That is such a beautiful way to close our interview today. And just once again, thank you so much for taking the time out of such a busy season for you, such an exciting season for you. And everyone here at Susan B. Anthony, looks forward to continuing to fight alongside you for the unborn, because just as you said, every single one of those little babies, those sparks of divinity, they have so much value. And so we look forward to walking alongside you, David. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to Exposed Abortion in America. Our mission is to give you, our listeners, the truth when it comes to exposing the abortion industry. Tune in next week to hear more about the secrets, horrors, and history of Planned Parenthood.